Hi guys, so in our last video we learned how to do 2D effects in section C of your process board, which includes bruises and scrapes. And today we're going to be moving into more 3D effects, and the material we're going to be working with is wax. So this is the scar wax you should have gotten in your kit. And we're going to be doing this in section D today. And what I'm going to have you do is take section D and separate it in half, because on the left side of section D we're going to be working with wax, and on the right side we're going to be working with silicone. So just to keep that separated, just throw a little line in there. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly in the center, but that way you have room to also work with silicone afterwards as well. Okay, so let's talk about nose and scar wax real quick. Nose and scar wax is very budget friendly, and it's a great easy way to build 3D effects on the skin without breaking the bank. The plus of nose and scar wax is it's really soft and easy to work with. You can get it in a variety of different colors. I have mine in, I think, fair. Yep, so I have mine in fair. And as much as I like wax, it's not necessarily appropriate to use in a more professional setting, mainly because nose and scar wax is heat sensitive, so it'll melt very easily on the skin, and unless you adhere it and seal it really, really well into the skin, there's a lot of room for it to become damaged or warp on the skin as time goes on. So this is a material you would use for creating an effect that doesn't need to stay on the skin very long. Your silicone, however, would be a great material that you can use on the skin if you'd like to have something a little bit more long-lasting. The 3rd degree silicone is a more widely used product in film and TV because the silicone cures on the skin, which allows the effect to stay on the skin a little bit longer. So I had you guys collect some reference images in the first assignment, and today we're going to be practicing sculpting a laceration. So I have my wound right here. If you take a look at this laceration, you can see obviously there's a very deep cut here, and then outside of the deepest part of the cut you actually see a little bit of fatty tissue, and that's what we're going to be sculpting in today with our wax. So to make this, we're going to start by laying the wax onto the board, and if you're doing this on skin and you would like it to stay a little bit longer, I recommend putting down some Prozaid. On the actual packaging it says to apply tacky spirit gum on a bony surface. In my opinion, spirit gum really isn't the best option because spirit gum hardens, and I find that something like Prozaid or even latex could be a more flexible option. But that's just my personal preference. So I'm going to take a little bit of this wax out and lay it into the board. And what I'm going to do, you don't want to manipulate the wax too much because this wax is very, very soft. So I'm going to try to keep this in my hands for as little time as possible. I created these little worms, and I'm going to lay that little worm in right here. I'm going to leave myself even more room on the side to do another effect, so I'm going to keep this on the smaller side. So I have one worm, and now I'm going to roll another worm. And what I'm creating here are these two side pieces that make up the wound, and I'm going to lay them next to each other and have them cross just a little bit on the edges. So I have 2 worms on my board, and now I'm going to blend them out. So I'm going to you guys can use your popsicle sticks if you don't have a palette knife. And I'm going to very lightly blend that out into the board. If you have the soft wax, it takes very little to push this around. Okay, I have a little bit of extra here. I'm just going to take that off. The goal when you are creating 3D effects on the skin is to keep the actual material as close to the open wound as possible. You don't want to have a lot of material, let's say stretching out to here, because that'll give your effect away very easily. Okay, now I'm going to blend the other side. And even after blending this, we're going to knock it down a little bit. Okay, so I've blended that down. We still obviously have ways to go until this starts to look realistic. What I'm gonna do is start pushing this skin now in. And blending it out a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit more pressure on the edge so it blends out more. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And now you can see the wound is starting to blend into the board a little bit more. Okay. Because this wax is so soft, I really don't have to do a whole lot to blend this down even further. Something you can do is use a little bit of 99% alcohol to smooth the edges down even more. So I'm just taking some alcohol and rubbing the edge of the wax and blending that out even more. Okay. I'm just, again, manipulating this wax a little bit more. I'm going to take my palette knife and open this up a little bit right here. Create more of a cut and let that taper out just like we did for the other effects. And then I'm going to take my palette knife and push out some of these edges so that they're not so perfect. So I'm just going to do that. Which gives the skin a little bit more of a torn look. You guys are welcome to try this on your skin as well, but you don't necessarily have to. Okay. And now I'm going to go in and add some of this fatty tissue that I pointed out before. Okay, now all I'm going to do is lay this inside my wound. You don't have to go overboard, all it takes is a little bit. And then just try not to knock over all the work you just did on the outside of the wound. And then I'm just going to take some alcohol again, spray some onto my finger, and then re-blend anything I might have disrupted on the outside here. That just goes to show how sensitive this wax is to touch. Okay. So this is pretty good. My only issue with this is, again, how much this edge really comes out. So I'm going to continue to blend out this edge even more. And then if you end up accidentally pulling up some of that paint, it's okay because we're going to go back over and paint this afterwards anyways. See how I'm trying to keep my edges as close to the actual wound as possible. And we essentially want our edges to look invisible here. So I'm just going to let the rest of this alcohol dry off, and then we will move on to painting this piece. Okay, so I'm going to do something else on the right here. I already laid in a little bit of wax before I even decided what I wanted to do. And then what I'm going to do is just put in some texture just to start it off. blend it. And then what I'm going to try to replicate is this, the texture of the boils on the skin. So I'm going to take some wax. I might stylize this a little bit, meaning maybe make it less realistic and just have more fun with it. And you can do that. It's fine. You know, there's obviously a time and place for making things look stylized and looking less realistic. It's just, you know, it's all about your intent going into it. And I'm going to try to not make these, you know, super intentionally spaced out. We want this to look organic. So I'm going to place these little boils try to add as much variety as I can when I'm placing these little boils. Switch up the shape a little bit. I thought this would be fun because it's a little change of pace from the laceration. Alright, so I'm going to start with that. And then I could use my palette knife to blend these out. But I also have some sculpting tools as well, so I'm going to use those. This is one of my favorite sculpting tools. The edge over here allows you to push the clay, or in this case wax, around. And then the little loop on the end of this allows you to actually clean up and eliminate clay or wax from the area you're working on. So I'm going to probably just use this tool while blending. And like I said, you can use a popsicle stick or any other, you know, finer tool that can really get into the spaces you're looking to blend out. I've used things like bobby pins or needles to sculpt. If you're creative enough, you can pretty much sculpt with anything. So all I'm doing is blending out the edges of these little boils that I created, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to make sure that I switch up the sizes, and because I see that a lot of the little boils that I put in are pretty much the same size, so I'm going to make sure that I make some of them larger and smaller as I continue to blend everything out. You guys can, as long as you do one laceration, you can do whatever you want. If you have some extra room on the right side, I decided to go with some boils / burns. Again, always try to have reference images. Even if you're creating something that's not particularly realistic, you always want something to work with. Okay, now I'm going to start, because I'm making this a little bit more stylized, I'm just going to start taking my tool and dragging it around, and that's going to add some fun texture. And then I'm going to start to use my little loop tool to get rid of some excess wax here, define things a little bit more. I'm just grazing over the surface of these little boils to make them look like they're embedded under the skin more. Okay, I'm going to take my finger and very, very lightly tap out some of this extra texture. And I'm using a tiny bit of pressure. I'm barely grazing over this. Making sure I'm blending out some of these little lines here. And you can see with this loop tool, I made some really nice texture in here. I like that a lot, and I'm gonna bring that out a little bit more. So another thing you can do too with these sculpting tools, I have a larger, this has some clay on it, but I have a larger rake tool, I guess you can say rake, loop. You can clean up the edges with this as well to give you a neater blending edge. So in this exercise, I really, really want you to focus on your edges and blending everything out. And I'm kind of crisscrossing. Okay. Take some alcohol, spray my fingertip, and tap some of that wax. And we are blending the wax down even further. Then I can go in with my tool again and define some of those lines. So because I laid in some of that wax before, it gives it even more depth. So I created some sort of sickly skin texture here. I'm not really sure what this turned into, but I'm okay with it. So now I'm going to let this alcohol dry, and then we'll start painting our wax.